Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire and I appreciate you stopping by. Today I have one of my longer videos for you, the type of video that I like to call an episode. In this episode, I have lots of card examples demonstrating many ways to do a double resist technique. Now it's kind of hard to describe this technique, so I'm going to show you it in action many times. But for it, you just need stamps, dye inks, clear embossing, and an iron. Yes, I had to find my iron, and you'll see that it's covered in dust because I don't like ironing, but it works great for this technique and allows you to create two backgrounds at once. There are many variations, so I hope you'll give this a try. It's a great way to stretch your supplies and create a background that's really cool. The card designs I made with my backgrounds are very simple, so I have some tips for that later in this video. Okay, let's start by creating the background that you see on this card here and do a basic double resist. This background is the new Simon Says stamp, Leaves and Berries. Beautiful stamp, and I thought it would be perfect for this technique. I'm using all background stamps today. I'll also use stencils, but you could use regular stamps if you want. To save time, I'm using a MISTI stamping tool. When using a cling stamp like this, you have to remove the pad. And I'm going to add my cardstock inside. So I just have regular white cardstock, nothing fancy. And I'm going to ink up my stamp with Gina K Designs Ink. This is Jelly Bean Green. And I'll stamp that onto my white cardstock. So there you can see it's just a basic stamped image. Now I want to clear emboss over this. So what I'm going to do is stamp with VersaMark Ink right on top of the image we already have. So I'm leaving my stamp in the same place, using my anti-static powder tool so we get a clean embossed image, inking up with VersaMark ink, and then we'll add clear embossing powder. Now if you have a pigment ink, a colored pigment ink, you could just stamp and then clear emboss that. I don't have any pigment inks anymore, I only use dye inks, so I decided just to go ahead and stamp with the dye ink, then the VersaMark ink on top and clear emboss. You could also clear emboss with Distress Oxide ink, but I didn't think about it at the time. So there we have a clear embossed green image on white cardstock. Next, I'm taking Tim Holtz Distress ink and an ink blending tool and applying a heavy amount of the mowed lawn green on top. The clear embossing on our stamped image will resist that darker green. So our image stays lighter, and then we have darker color in the background. So far, what we have done is a basic embossed resist technique, but today we're going to step it up and create another background from this one. This is when you need an iron. This is the iron that we have in our house that is covered in dust and I couldn't find at first. I have it set at the highest temperature. You can buy a really inexpensive iron for this technique or use what you have, and I'll have tips on how to take care of your iron as we go. On my work surface, I'm putting a folded towel and then our inked background. I have a piece of green cardstock that I'm going to lay on top. And now I'm going to take my hot iron and put it on top of this. You want to make sure that you do not touch your iron to the embossing. Notice that that green cardstock is over our embossing. I just lightly swept the iron across it, and you can see that it melted the embossing powder and transferred the embossing onto the green cardstock. So now I have this second background. Before I do anything with that, I'm going to just take a piece of printer paper, put that on top of my background, and apply more heat to remove the rest of the embossing. You can see how it transfers onto the paper, and now we have this two-tone background that is perfectly smooth. There's no raised areas, there's no shine to it, and it gives this really cool muted look. I just love it. Now with that extra green cardstock piece that we ironed onto, I can now put green ink on top of that, or whatever color I want. I'm using mowed lawn again, and you can see how that embossing that we transferred onto this piece with the iron resists the ink we put on top. It's not a perfect image because I just did a quick swipe of the iron across it, and I wasn't careful to get even pressure. Kind of like the variation in this one, but I will show you more impressive results later in this video. This is just a quick and basic example. And although there is clear embossing powder on this, it doesn't have the shine. It's really cool. It's almost like a wax paper look. So there's a comparison between the two backgrounds we just made from one technique. Okay, by the way, I'm going to move on and create more backgrounds, and then we'll come back to turn them all into cards at the end of this video. Okay, for my next example, I have a more high contrast background where we have the green stamping with the blue ink around it. Again, I'm starting with white cardstock where I stamp the background with green ink and then clear heat embossed on top. This time I'm going to apply Tim Holtz Distress Ink in the Blueprint Sketch color. So we have like a light green image with the blue around it. So here you can see the green does have that shine to it because we clear heat embossed. But now we're going to remove that shine. So I have my folded towel and I have a light blue piece of cardstock that I'm going to place over our inking. Make sure that it covers all of the inking. You don't want to get any embossing powder on the surface of your iron. Okay, now this time I'm going to do another quick sweep of the iron right across it. So we're just going to press right across. And this will transfer some of the embossing powder onto the blue cardstock. You can see it there. In fact, it'd be nice to use that as a soft tone-on-tone background, but I'll ink over it later. Now, since this piece still has embossing powder on it, I'm putting a piece of printer paper over it, or just scrap cardstock. And I'm really pressing the iron on that to remove all of the embossing. So now we have a light green stamped image with blue around it. That's a unique look because usually you have dark stamping on a light background. Okay, now with that extra blue piece that we ironed onto, we can go ahead and apply ink on that. And that embossing powder that we transferred with the iron will resist the ink on top. And it's a really cool look. Remember, the clear embossing, that shiny look goes away, and you get what looks like kind of a wax print. So now we have this background we can use also. Okay, let's move on to a different background stamp to do some more examples. This is the Simon Says Stamp Christmas Kaleidoscope stamp. It's really beautiful. Here I am centering my cardstock onto my background stamp, and I'll close the MISTI onto it upside down, flip it over and open it, and that way I can be sure my cardstock is centered when we stamp it. Now I'm inking up the stamp with Gina K Designs Ink. After I've stamped this, I will clean my stamp, use my anti-static powder tool, and stamp the image again in the same place with VersaMark Ink. Then I can add my clear embossing powder and heat set it to create an embossed image. Okay, now it's time to do the resist technique where I'm applying ink on top. Any dye ink would work for this, but I find that the Tim Holtz Distress Inks blend beautifully. This time I'm using multiple colors on top. I thought it'd be fun to use Blueprint Sketch, Peacock Feather, and Lucky Clover. Kind of have the colors going out from the center. When doing this, you just want to make sure that you overlap the colors so you get a nice blended look. After you've applied your ink, always use a dry cloth to wipe the excess ink off of the embossed areas. This allows you to get a crisp look. Okay, now I have my folded towel. I'll put my inked piece down and a piece of light blue cardstock on top. Now this time I'm going to apply a lot of heat and pressure with my iron so that I get all of the embossing powder transferred onto my blue cardstock. And there you can see it's transferred beautifully. And then on our other piece, we have that inking, that light looking stamping on the colorful dark background, and it's perfectly smooth, a nice matte finish. Okay, now on the other piece where we ironed off onto the light blue cardstock, I can go ahead and add ink on top of that, just like I did on my other background. So now we have two backgrounds out of one. Again, always after applying ink on top of embossing, use a dry cloth to buff off the excess ink. Now, one thing I want to mention is on this second piece where we ironed the embossing off onto. The image will be thicker lined because the embossing kind of smooshes out. So you'll see the lines are more bold on this one, but it still gives a great look. And I'll show more of that later. Okay, we're going to add another step into this technique to get a new look. In this case, I started with a background where I stamped with green, clear heat embossed on top. And now I'm adding Barn Door Red Distress Ink on top. So I have a red background with a light green stamped image. Once I'm done inking, I'll make sure to remove all the excess ink with a dry cloth. Now before we do the iron off embossing, I want to prepare the cardstock that we're going to iron onto by stamping on it. So we get some layering here. This is the Hero Arts Nevermore background stamp. I love this one. It just looks kind of like jumbled text. Well, I'm going to stamp with Seabreeze ink onto a light blue cardstock. So I'm not doing any embossing here, just basic stamping. Okay, so now when I iron off of our red piece, I'm going to actually iron onto that text background so we get that layered look. So onto my towel, I'll put the red inked piece face up, then the stamped background face down, and I'll apply lots of heat and pressure with my iron so that we transfer all of the clear embossing from our red piece onto this blue piece. Okay, so once I've just ironed that completely, I have this piece which doesn't look like much. Hang on to that, we'll come back to it. But here we have our red background with the green stamping. And again, we removed all of that shine from it, so it gives a really unique look that you really can't achieve with any other stamping technique. Okay, now the other background that we're creating with this round of technique looks completely different. So on top of this, I'm putting Distress ink. And what's cool about this is trapped under the leaves that we ironed onto this is that text background that we did. So you get the look of texture and a lot going on, a lot of layering on this example. So you can see again that when you iron off, the images become more bold, but it still works great. Okay, let's do a few more examples. I'm going to show you some other ways to step up the backgrounds. For this one, I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Outline Winter Floral Background Stamp. This is a great stamp for this technique. So I have a few examples. Once again, I'm starting by stamping with dye ink. This is Gina K Passionate Pink. I'll stamp this onto white cardstock, clean the stamp, and then clear heat emboss the same image in the exact same place. This time I'm applying a heavy layer of Seedless Preserves Distress ink, and then I'll buff that clean with a dry cloth. Now it's time for the iron off embossing. I'm just putting pink cardstock on top of our inked background and applying lots of heat and pressure to transfer all of the embossing onto the pink cardstock. Now what is transferred onto the pink cardstock will look a little bit more bold, but it still looks great, especially with this design. Okay, and here's a look at our background where we did the inking. We removed all of the clear embossing shine and you get a perfectly smooth background. Okay, so on our ironed off piece here, the pink cardstock, I'm applying Picked Raspberry Distress ink on top. I did kind of a lighter layer of the ink, and now I'm coming in with a blender brush and applying some Seedless Preserves so I could get a little variation of color. And again, that ironed off embossing resists that ink we're putting on top. I always like to trim my backgrounds down as I go because it really helps to clean it up and tell me if I like where I'm headed with it. Sometimes I don't like a background until it's trimmed down and cleaned up nicely. Now this time I'm going to stamp on top of the iron off embossing. Before we stamped under it, this time I'm stamping on top. This is the Altenew Pinstripe background stamp, which I use a lot, and I'm stamping it with Seedless Preserve ink. Right away I'm buffing off the excess ink. Wherever there is that iron off embossing, it resists a lot of the ink that we stamp on top. So it looks like the stripes are really only on the darker background and not so much on the image itself, that stamped image. Such a cool technique and a great way to kind of step up this double resist technique. I just love the results of this. This would be hard to achieve other ways. Here's another piece of light pink cardstock where I ironed off onto from a background that I created. I just wanted to mention that with this technique, you can really get soft looking backgrounds or bold looking backgrounds. There are so many different looks you can get depending on the stamp you use and the inks you use. So I encourage you to try it and see what you can do with this double resist technique. For this particular one, I went for a softer look, and it shows you can use this technique in many ways. Okay, now this next version of the technique I think gives the coolest results. This is really fun to do. In this case, I'm starting with that same background stamp, stamping it again with Gina K Passionate Pink ink, and then I'm going to clear heat emboss right on top of that, just like we've been doing throughout the video. However, this time I'm not going to ink over this right away. We're going to wait to do the inking on top. So first we're going to do the iron off embossing. I'm using printer paper here to put on top and then applying heat to remove all of the embossing powder. Now, I should have used cardstock so I could actually use that second piece, but for some reason I grabbed printer paper. But basically all I'm doing is smushing the embossing powder down and lifting the shine away onto the printer paper. So what we end up with is what looks like just pink stamping on a white background. But when I go to put my blue distress ink on top, this is tumbled glass, check it out. There's like a white halo around our pink stamping. That's because the clear embossing powder smooshed down and melted kind of into the paper a bit, leaving behind just enough to resist the blue ink that we're putting on top. So you get a very smooth look, no shine to this. It's absolutely gorgeous, but you have like a white halo around your pink stamping, which gives a really cool result. So I plan to do more with this technique. I think this gives really a unique look that I wouldn't be able to achieve in other ways. Now, before I move on to showing you this technique with stencils, I have one more background stamp technique to show you. In this case, we're going to add shine to the background. I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Pinecone background stamp. This is such an elegant, classic looking stamp. And I'm stamping it with Gina K Sandy Beach ink. So there you can see the detail that you get with this. Now I've cleaned my stamp, used my anti-static powder tool, and I'm stamping it again with VersaMark ink this time. We'll add our clear embossing on top and heat set it. I really like how this looks like a soft gold stamped image in the end. Okay, now on top of this, I'm applying peeled paint distress ink. Now, you could leave the background as this, which is a basic embossed resist, but I feel like the embossing powder that we put on top of this detailed stamp image kind of removes some of the detail. I don't know why, but it looks better if you do the iron off step, which I'm about to do. In this case, there's so much embossed area, I just used a baby wipe to remove the excess ink off of the embossed area. And now we can do the iron off embossing. I'm using a piece of printer paper. Again, you could use cardstock to save what you remove. Applying the heat to it so that we transfer our clear embossing onto the printer paper. And what we're left with is this very smooth, matte looking background. And we still have that detailed look to our stamping. It really makes a big difference to remove the embossing from this. But I thought I'd step this up a little bit more, and I'm going to actually spray this with some shimmer. So I have Perfect Pearl pigment powder. I had put some of that into this little spray bottle here with some water, and you can see the pearlized water that I have. Any kind of shimmer spritz would work here too. So when I spray this on top, anywhere that it's green will absorb that shimmer in the water. Now the pinecone areas, remember it leaves a little clear embossing behind even when we iron off. That resists that shine. So what we end up with is a green background with lots of shimmer to it and the nice clean stamping around that. I like that shimmer so much that I decided to grab this background that I made earlier and add some shimmer to that too. And you can see how the light pink stamping resists the spray that we put on top, and the purple background absorbs it, giving it some beautiful shimmer. Okay, so now before we create our cards, let's do an example of this using stencils. Now this is the new Simon Says Stamp Winter Floral Stencil, which creates a beautiful background with the one stencil. However, they also came out with a set of layered stencils that gives a similar look, but you can do multiple colors. This is the Simon Says Stamp Winter Floral Layering Stencil. And all you do is you ink up each, and they line up perfectly, and you can create a multicolored background. I really like layering stencils because there are many techniques you can use them for. Okay, I'm starting with the flower stencil first, and I'm inking it up with Picked Raspberry Distress Ink. Now, after I've inked it up, I'm going to wipe the excess off with a dry cloth. And then I'm using an inking tool to add VersaMark ink over our flowers. So what we have is pink ink with VersaMark ink on top. I'll then remove my stencil, add clear embossing powder, and heat set. So basically we have those inked flowers with clear embossing on top. Now it's time to use the leaf stencil. To do so, I line up the leaf stencil behind the flower stencil, and then I line up the flowers and the stencil with the flowers I've already inked. Then remove the flower stencil and our leaves are perfectly positioned. I'm applying Mowed Lawn ink over the openings of the leaves. I'll use a cloth to remove the excess ink. Then I will apply VersaMark ink with an inking tool over the leaves. Remove the stencil, add clear embossing powder, and heat set. So now we have our flowers and our leaves done in color with clear embossing on top. Now I'm going to take the other leaf stencil, put it behind our flower stencil, making sure it lines up right. Then I'll put that over our background, lining up the flower stencil with the flowers that we've already inked. And then I will make sure it's all lined up and then remove the flower stencil, leaving the leaf stencil behind. Now over this leaf stencil, I'm using Twisted Citron Distress Ink. I'll buff that clean and then apply VersaMark ink and then add our clear embossing powder and heat set. So we end up with these leaves clear embossed also. Now the fourth and final stencil does little dot details. So that one was very easy to line up, and I'm using Right Persimmon Distress Ink. I apply that, wipe it clean, then I apply the VersaMark ink, and then we clear emboss it. So basically we have this background of colorful ink with clear embossing on top. So basically it's like what we created before. Earlier we used stamps, this time I use stencils. Now over this, I just wanted to apply a soft amount of blue. So this is Gina K Seabreeze ink, and I'm using a blending brush, which I find is better for doing a soft amount of ink. Once I've covered the background, I'll go ahead and use a dry cloth to remove the excess ink from the heat embossed areas. Okay, so now it's time to do our iron off embossing once again. Now in this case, I have some blue cardstock where I've stamped that noteworthy stamp from Hero Arts once again. So we're going to iron off on top of that stamping. So I'm putting these face to face onto our towel, and I'm applying pressure and heat with our iron. This will transfer most of the embossing powder and all of the shine onto the blue cardstock piece, leaving our inked piece very smooth looking. I really like how the blue is just around those images, really pretty. Okay, now we have this leftover piece here. On top of it, I am applying Mermaid Lagoon blue ink. That's a beautiful color. And you can see how the text is trapped under that ironed off embossing. Such a beautiful look. And of course, the areas are more bold because we squished that embossing powder when we transferred it. So there we have our second background. It looks a little messy here, but again, remember, once you trim it down, it always looks better. Oh, and by the way, that second color of distress ink that I used was Lucky Clover. Okay, now I have created a bunch of backgrounds. It's time to turn them into simple card designs. I tried to keep all of these very simple. I love to create the backgrounds and spend less time on the assembly of the cards. So I have some tips to share with you along the way. Let's start with this example here, where we have the blue background with the green stamping. For this, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Stitched Oak Leaf, which is the one that you see on the right. A little later on, I'll be using the Stitched Maple Leaf that you see on the left. I really like the large size of these and the stitching details. So I die cut the oak leaf 3 times from white cardstock, and I'm gluing them together for a stacked look. This is a great way to add some dimension. I like stacking my die cuts when I'm putting it against a busy background because it allows it to stand out more. I also die cut the leaf die from green cardstock, and I'm going to glue that on top of the white one but offset so we have a layered look. Around the bottom of these leaves, I'm tying a piece of jute just for a fun little bow. I just like to loop it around and do a quick bow. It's really easy to adjust. Just make a large bow and then pull the ends to make it smaller. On the back of these leaves, I'm using some Lawn Fawn double-sided tape, and I'm going to add that to a piece of platinum vellum. This is like a pearlescent looking vellum piece, and this will kind of mute out the background so that our leaves will stand out even more. Now, once I have that positioned on the vellum, I'll flip it over and put adhesive behind those leaves onto the vellum. That way we're hiding our adhesive on the vellum so it doesn't show through. So I'll add this onto the front of our card, and then I added a simple sentiment strip on a blue cardstock that matched our inked background. So although this card has a busy background, we allow that center area to stand out a bit more by layering the die cuts and by also using a piece of vellum behind it. Up close, you can see how it looks like we have a light green stamped image on a dark blue background, which we did with that iron-off technique. It gives a nice, smooth, matte look that's gorgeous in real life. And by the way, the sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp All the Thanks stamp set. I've used this in videos before and I reach for it often. I really like the classic style of all the sentiments. Okay, my next simple card uses another one of the double resist backgrounds that I created earlier in this video. In this case, I added a stacked maple leaf white die cut to the center and tied a little bow around the bottom. I also added dots of glossy accents to the berries in the background for some shine. Now that Hugs die cut in the center is actually from the coordinating die set for the Simon Says Stamp Healing Hugs stamp set. Really like the set, I've used it before. And there's the little Hugs die that I used on this card. I wanted to keep the card simple because I love that background so much. And by adding simple white die cuts, you keep the focus on the color of the background. Okay, my next example was super easy to make and a great way to use up smaller backgrounds like this one. I used the Simon Says Stamp Leaf Branch Oval die. I really like window dies like this one. I find they're great for simple card designs. So I'm going to position this onto a piece of white cardstock, and I'm using the tape to line it up to make sure I get it straight on my card. After I've got it in position, I'll run it through my die cut machine, and we have our die cut oval window. Now I'm going to take the same die and die cut it from our background. We're going to do an inlay technique with this. So I'm just going to place it right over our inked background. This is one that we created with our ironed off cardstock piece. And now I'm going to take the pieces and inlay it into our white die cut piece. Here I have another piece of white cardstock that I'm covering with double-sided adhesive. Once I have it covered, I can remove the release paper, place our window piece on top of it, and that way we'll have exposed adhesive in the openings. We can take our blue die cut pieces and just pop them right in place like a puzzle. Although I'm using this die for an inlay technique, you could also use it for a shaker window. It would work perfectly for that. I stamped a sentiment along that strip and also added a few white pearls around the white branch area. You can see how this just shows a smaller portion of our background. So there are many different ways you can use these double resist backgrounds. And again, that I appreciate you so much is from this All the Thanks stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. Okay, my next simple card design shows how you can white heat emboss a really fancy looking sentiment on a piece of vellum for simple card design. I also added faux stitching around the outside edge. This is another way to step up a simple card. I really like these Lawn Fawn just stitching double rectangle dies. It doesn't cut anything, it just adds 2 lines of stitching. And this large one is perfect for the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. Next, I'm trimming down my double resist background so it fits inside of that faux stitching. And by the way, keep these little scraps because you can use them on other cards. And I'll link to a scraps video where I show some techniques to do with them. So I white heat emboss this beautiful sentiment on a strip of platinum vellum. On the back of my inked piece, I'm putting adhesive at the top and bottom. This way, I can place my vellum on the front of the card, just temporarily taping it in place, and then fold the ends at the top and the bottom to wrap it around our inked background piece. That way, we hold our vellum piece in place, but we don't have any adhesive showing on the front of the card. This is my favorite way to add vellum to a card. And by the way, I reuse those little pieces of purple tape many times. Okay, now I can glue this at the center of our note card, and I'm also using glossy accents just to add little dots that are shiny on top of the berries in the background. So this is a very simple card design, but we add interest to it with the faux stitching around the edge, the shine of that platinum vellum, and the little dots of glossy accents on the background. By the way, this was the background where I stamped first with a text background stamp, ironed off on top of it, and then added the ink on top. The sentiment that I white heat embossed on the vellum is from the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Greeting Mix 1 stamp set. This is a large set with lots of holiday greetings in lots of different styles and sizes. It's a great one that covers pretty much anything you would need, and I'll use it a few additional times in this video. Okay, my next example shows another simple card design using white die cuts on an inked background. Before I talk about the different things that I added to the card, take a closer look at that background. This is the one that we did with iron off embossing, and then we added the pearlized water on top. The shimmer adds a lot to that background. Now the die cut pieces that I added on top are from the Simon Says Stamp Christmas Foliage die set. I die cut them from white cardstock and layered a few together and just assembled them onto a vellum banner strip. I used the Simon Says Stamp stitch banners to die cut the vellum piece and wrapped it over the top of our inked panel. Now for the sentiment strip that I added, I used the new Simon Says Stamp Holiday Sentiment strips. These are pre-printed pieces with sentiments that you can cut out and add to your cards. Because I use a pre-printed sentiment and simple die cuts, this card came together very quickly. This next card is probably my favorite of the bunch, and it's super simple. This background is one that we created with iron-off embossing on light pink cardstock, and then I stamped over it with the Altenew Pinstripe background. I cut that at a diagonal and added it to a white note card, and then added a white thin cardstock strip. I stamped Merry and Bright underneath it and also added some gemstones to the background for some sparkle. The Merry and Bright is again from the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Greeting Mix 1 set. This is, again, one of my favorite cards from the collection. I think I would make a bunch this way. It'd be a great one to send out for the holidays, and it'd be a lot of fun to create. Okay, this is the background that I created that was a little softer than the others. I added a Simon Says Stamp Thinking of You heart die cut. I die cut the Thinking of You heart from white cardstock 3 times and glued them together for dimension. And then I die cut the solid heart from platinum vellum and put it behind it. This allows the heart to stand out more against the background. Again, I added some gemstones onto the background just for sparkle. Here's another simple card design. In this case, I used a long scrap of platinum vellum and white heat embossed Calm and Bright on top. I wrapped that around our inked background and added it to a white note card. Now that leaves die cut, I die cut 3 times from white cardstock and glued together for dimension, added it to our card along with some gemstones. Now that Calm and Bright sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp Clean Line Christmas stamp set from CZ Designs. I really like the clean line sentiments. They're very thin and have a very classic look for it and work with pretty much any style of card. By the way, the leaf die that I used is from the Simon Says Stamp Eucalyptus die set. I've used this before in videos and it's definitely a favorite of mine. Okay, my next card is very simple, but it uses that really crazy cool background that I created with the white halo around the pink stamping. For this one, all I did was add gemstones and also the big thanks sentiment to the center. When you have a background like this that has lots of color to it, I feel like keeping the sentiment is the best way to go. Didn't take long at all after we created the background. And once again, this sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp CZ Designs All to Thanks stamp set. I tell you, I reach for this stamp set a lot. Okay, my next 2 cards are the ones that feature the Simon Says Stamp Christmas Kaleidoscope background stamp. The card on the left uses the piece that we did originally, where we did the stamping and the heat embossing, added the ink on top, and then ironed off. The piece on the right is the one that we ironed off onto. So that's why it has the bolder lines, because we smush that embossing powder when we iron off. So let's take a closer look at the first one. I added some gemstones to the pattern on the background. And then I added a layered joyful die cut. So I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock and glued it together. And then I die cut the shadow die from platinum vellum and put that behind the stacked white die cut. This is the Simon Says Stamp Joyful die, which I've used before in videos. Now the other card I kept very similar. I added gemstones to the background, but instead of a die cut in the center, I added 3 sentiment strips. Now these sentiments are from the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Greetings Mix 1 stamp set, which I've used a few times in this video. And I just cut the strips all the same length and then stamped the sentiments on them. My next card is super simple. All I did was add it to a white note card and then added a gold heat embossed sentiment strip at the top center and a few gold pearls from Studio Katia. Now check out that background. It is super smooth, but there's shimmer on the green, but not the Pinecone images. It's really cool, the looks that you can get by doing iron-off embossing. If you've never tried it, I encourage you to do so because the results in real life are very impressive. And once again, the season's greeting sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Greetings Mix 1 stamp set. I hope they do more sentiments like this with the thin line box around it. Gives a nice finishing touch. So I think Christina designed the stamp set, so I'm hoping she sees this and designs some more like that. Okay, last but not least, we have our stenciled card. I kept this one very simple once again so that the background shows off. All I did was use the Simon Says Stamp Prayers die set. This cuts the word prayers and the shadow. I die cut prayers 3 times from white cardstock and once from pink and layered those together and put them onto a white shadow die cut. On top of the pink cardstock, I put some shimmer with the Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen. And then I put a layer of Ranger Glossy accents. So this gives it both shimmer and dimension and shine. It allows it to stand out against the busy background. I also added a simple sending stamp sentiment right above the word prayers. So there you can see the smooth matte background that we got by doing that iron off embossing resist technique. By the way, the sending sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp Healing Hugs stamp set. So I just cut the word sending off of this longer greeting here. It's a great way to get more from a single stamp. Okay, there is a long video for you for all those people who were asking where my long videos were. I hope this inspires you to try this technique in one of the many variations. It's really fun to do. All the supplies that I use are linked in my YouTube description below, but remember, you can use what you have for this technique. In the middle are a couple other videos that you might like that are related to this topic. I appreciate the time that you've spent with me today. I know it's a long video, but I appreciate it. Hope you have a good day, and we'll see you soon.